12 movies entered 2026 with massive expectations, and within weeks they collapsed. Not quietly, not gradually, completely. Studios burned hundreds of millions chasing formulas that no longer work. From unseen critical gems to overhyped sequels that audiences rejected instantly. And one shocking disaster did something even worse. It killed an entire franchise overnight. Stay with me because the numbers get brutal and the decisions get even worse. Number 12, Dead Man's Wire, 2026. There is a specific kind of failure that feels almost unfair. Not the loud kind where audiences reject a film, not the kind where critics tear it apart, but the quiet collapse where a movie simply never reaches the people who might have loved it. That is exactly what happened to Dead Man's Wire. On paper, now this should have worked. The film carried strong performances and critical praise. Reviews hovered in elite territory, suggesting a thoughtful, well-crafted production. In another era, that alone could have driven audiences into theaters. But modern cinema does not operate on quality alone. It operates on visibility, and this film had none. The studio behind it lacked distribution muscle. No wide marketing campaign, no aggressive promotional rollout, no saturation across media platforms. The result was devastating. The film opened quietly and disappeared even faster. It grossed roughly $2 million worldwide against a production budget of about $15 million. That number alone tells only part of the story. The real calculation is break even. Here, a film typically needs to earn at least double its production budget to recover costs, including marketing and distribution. That means this film needed approximately $30 million to survive. Instead, it stopped at $2 million. That leaves an estimated loss of nearly $28 million. And yet, the tragedy is not financial alone. This was a film that never had a chance to compete. It was not rejected. It was unseen. In an industry driven by attention, obscurity is the most brutal outcome of all, because you cannot fix what the audience never experiences. Number 11, I Can Only Imagine 2, 2026. Success can be misleading. It can convince studios that lightning can be engineered instead of captured. That is the illusion that drove the creation of I Can Only Imagine 2. And the original film became a phenomenon not because of scale, but because of sincerity. With a modest budget and strong emotional resonance, it connected deeply with its audience. It was not just a hit, it was a moment. And moments cannot simply be recreated by increasing investment. For the sequel, the budget more than doubled to around $18 million. Expectations rose with it. The assumption was simple. If the first film made over $80 million worldwide, then a bigger sequel would amplify that success. But audiences do not respond to math. They respond to meaning. The opening weekend revealed the shift immediately. Revenue dropped sharply compared to the original. Interest had cooled. The emotional closure of the first story left little reason to return. And in a genre dependent on word of mouth, momentum is everything. Once it weakens, recovery becomes almost impossible. The film ultimately struggled to build strong legs at the box office. While exact totals remained modest, the trajectory pointed clearly toward underperformance. To break even, the film likely needed at least $40 million globally when marketing costs are considered. Instead, it stalled far below expectations, resulting in an estimated loss of around $20 to $25 million. This is not a case of failure through poor quality alone. It is a failure of assumption, the belief that an audience will return simply because they once showed up. But audiences are not loyal to brands in this space. They are loyal to experiences. And this time, the experience felt complete the first time. That is the risk of sequels built on emotion. Once the story has already said everything it needed to say, the sequel becomes an echo, and echoes rarely fill theaters. Number 10, The Strangers. Chapter 3, 2026. Franchises rarely collapse overnight. They erode, slowly, predictably. Each new installment shaving off a portion of the audience until what remains is no longer sustainable. That pattern defines The Strangers. Chapter 3 with almost mathematical precision. The original The Strangers succeeded because of restraint, minimal locations, relatable fear. A sense that the horror could happen to anyone. It was intimate and effective. The sequel weakened that formula. And by the time the third entry arrived, the franchise was already operating on borrowed attention. What makes this failure particularly revealing is how consistent the decline has been. The first film opened strong, The second dropped significantly. The third fell even further, opening to around $3.5 million and finishing with approximately 4.5 million worldwide against a production budget near 8.5 million. But production cost is only the starting point. Once marketing and distribution are factored in, the film likely needed at least $17 to $20 million to break even. Instead, it barely crossed a quarter of that threshold. The estimated loss sits in the range of $12 to $15 million. This is not just a financial misstep, it is a case study in franchise fatigue. Audiences recognized the pattern before the studio did. Each sequel offered diminishing novelty, familiar structure without meaningful reinvention. And horror, more than any genre, depends on unpredictability. When fear becomes predictable, it stops working. When a franchise becomes predictable, audiences stop showing up. By the third installment, the brand name was no longer an advantage. It was a warning. And the box office reflected that shift with brutal clarity. Number 9. Good luck, have fun, don't die. 2026. Comebacks in Hollywood are never guaranteed. Time does not preserve relevance, it erases it. That reality defines the performance of Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die. Directed by Gore Verbinski, the filmmaker behind massive global hits like Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, expectations carried an invisible weight. A decade away from mainstream success creates distance, and distance changes audience behavior. The film itself was not without merit. It carried a creative premise, blending science fiction with dark comedy. While the marketing attempted to be unconventional, viral stunts, targeted promotions, efforts to connect with modern anxieties about technology and artificial intelligence. On paper, the strategy was clever, but execution matters more than intent. The film struggled to convert curiosity into ticket sales. It opened outside the top tier of releases and never recovered momentum. The worldwide gross stalled at around $8 million against a production budget of approximately $20 million. That gap becomes devastating when full costs are considered. With marketing included, the break-even point likely approached $40 to $50 million. The film did not come close. The estimated loss sits between $30 and $40 million. This failure exposes a critical shift in audience behavior. Recognition of a director's past success no longer guarantees present interest. The industry once relied on names to sell tickets. Today, the concept must sell itself immediately. Even positive word of mouth could not save it. Because in modern cinema, timing is everything. If a film does not capture attention instantly, it disappears. Not gradually, instantly. And that is what happened here. Not a rejection, not outrage, just absence. The audience did not reject the film. They simply chose something else. Number 8. Return to Silent Hill, 2026. There is a dangerous middle ground in filmmaking, a place where a movie tries to satisfy two audiences and ends up satisfying neither. That is exactly where Return to Silent Hill landed. Video game adaptations have entered a new era. The Super Mario Brothers. My movie proved that loyalty to source material could translate into massive box office success. The Sonic the Hedgehog franchise showed that tone and accessibility could coexist. The blueprint was clear. Respect the fans while welcoming new viewers. This film attempted to walk that line and lost its balance. For longtime fans of the Silent Hill games, it felt diluted, too polished, too cinematic. For general audiences, it felt inaccessible, too steeped in mythology they did not understand. Instead of bridging the gap, it exposed it. The numbers tell the outcome without emotion. A production budget of roughly $23 million, a worldwide gross of about $12 million. On the surface, that already signals trouble. But once marketing and distribution are factored in, the film likely needed at least $45 million to break even. It reached barely a quarter of that threshold. The estimated loss falls between $30 and $35 million. What makes this collapse more significant is the timing. This was released during a moment when game adaptations were thriving. The audience was there. The demand existed. And yet the film failed to capture either group it was targeting. This is the risk of indecision. When a film does not fully commit to one vision, it becomes fragmented. Audiences can feel that uncertainty. They may not articulate it, but they respond to it. And in this case, they responded by staying away. Number 7, Shelter, 2026. Star power used to be the safest investment in Hollywood. A recognizable face could carry a film regardless of concept. That era is ending. and Shelter is one of the clearest indicators of that shift. We're headlined by Jason Statham, a performer associated with consistent box office reliability. The film entered the market with a sense of quiet confidence. Recent successes suggested momentum. The assumption was simple. Audiences would show up because they always had. But the modern audience is no longer driven by familiarity alone. They are driven by distinction. And this film offered very little that felt new. The premise followed a familiar structure. The execution did not elevate it. And without a strong hook, even a recognizable star cannot generate urgency. The opening weekend exposed that reality immediately. A debut of around $5.5 million marked one of the weakest starts of the actor's career in nearly 2 decades. The global total climbed to approximately $27 million against a production budget of $50 million. That alone creates a deficit. But once marketing costs are included, the break-even point likely exceeded $100 million. The film did not come close. The estimated loss sits between $70 and $80 million. What makes this more revealing is the comparison that emerged during its release. A re-release of The Lord of the Rings. The Fellowship of the Ring, decades old, outperformed it in certain markets despite fewer screens. That contrast is not just embarrassing, it is instructive. Audiences will revisit something they trust before they gamble on something that feels generic. This is the new equation. Recognition is no longer enough. Without originality or urgency, even established stars cannot prevent a film from collapsing. And this film did not just underperform. It exposed a structural change in how audiences choose what to watch. Number 6. Dracula, 2026. Some ideas arrive already exhausted, not because they are bad, but because they have been told too many times without reinvention. That is the weight carried by Dracula. The character itself is one of the most adapted figures in cinematic history. From Dracula to Bram Stoker's Dracula, audiences have seen every variation imaginable. Horror, romance, tragedy, reinvention is not optional with this material, it is essential. This version attempted to shift the focus toward tragic romance while retaining elements of horror. That creative decision immediately created tension. Fans of the genre expected fear. New audiences expected clarity. The film delivered neither with conviction. The problem was not just creative direction. It was positioning. A budget of approximately $52 million placed the film in a category that demands broad appeal. But the tone was too conflicted to reach a wide audience. The result was predictable. The worldwide gross stalled around $34 million. On paper, that might seem manageable, but once marketing costs are included, the break-even point likely approached $100 to $110 million. The film fell dramatically short. The estimated loss sits between $65 and $75 million. What makes this failure more revealing is the disconnect between creator and material. The director openly expressed limited enthusiasm for the horror genre itself. That detachment is not invisible. It seeps into the film's identity. Audiences sense it even if they cannot define it. This is what happens when a familiar property is treated as an obligation instead of an opportunity. Instead of feeling like a fresh perspective, the film felt like another version in an already crowded archive. And when audiences feel they have already seen a story, they rarely pay to see it again. Number 5. 28 years later. The Bone Temple, 2026. There is a belief in the film industry that quality can compensate for everything else, that strong reviews can rescue a film, that critical approval can override timing. 28 years later, The Bone Temple proves that belief is no longer reliable. On paper, this film had every advantage: strong reviews, recognizable talent, a respected franchise lineage tied back to 28 days later. The ingredients were all present. The execution was not the problem. The problem was timing and scale. The film arrived only months after a previous installment in the same franchise. That proximity created immediate fatigue. Audiences had not had time to rebuild anticipation. The excitement cycle was cut short before it could begin again. At the same time, the budget expanded far beyond the franchise's historical model. Earlier entries succeeded because they were lean, focused, intimate. This installment attempted to operate at a larger scale, expecting a broader audience that had never truly existed for this property. The financial outcome reflects that miscalculation. With a production budget of approximately $63 million, the film needed at least $125 to $140 million to break even. Instead, it generated around $35 million worldwide, before being pulled from theaters early. That leaves an estimated loss of roughly $90 to $100 million. This is the critical lesson. Positive reception does not guarantee financial success. A film can be well made and still fail if it is positioned incorrectly. Audiences do not evaluate films in isolation. They respond to timing, saturation, relevance. And when those factors misalign, even a strong film cannot survive. This was not a failure of craft. It was a failure of strategy. And in modern cinema, strategy determines survival. Number 4, Mercy 2026. There is a growing divide in Hollywood that few studios want to acknowledge. The difference between a star inside a franchise and a star outside of one. Mercy sits directly at the center of that divide. Led by Chris Pratt, the film entered the market carrying the weight of past billion-dollar successes. Guardians of the Galaxy, Jurassic World, the Super Mario Bros. Movie. These were not just hits, they were global events, and they created a dangerous assumption that the same audience would follow the actor anywhere. But audiences do not follow actors. They follow experiences. The premise of the film was immediately limiting. A contained story centered around a character restrained in a single location, interacting primarily with an artificial intelligence system. Conceptually interesting, commercially restrictive. The trailer revealed that limitation instantly, and once audiences understand the full scope of a film before release, curiosity disappears. The numbers confirm that reaction. A production budget of approximately $60 million. A worldwide gross of around $54 million. On the surface, that appears close. But the real calculation includes marketing. Once those costs are added, the break-even point likely rises to at least $140 to $150 million. The gap becomes unavoidable. The estimated loss falls between $85 and $95 million. External factors, such as weather disruptions during opening weekend, offered convenient explanations, but they do not account for the core issue: lack of demand. The audience simply did not see a reason to prioritize this film over alternatives. This is the new reality. Star power amplifies a strong concept. It cannot replace one. And when a film relies too heavily on recognition instead of urgency, it exposes that weakness immediately. This was not a catastrophic collapse. It was something more revealing. A slow confirmation that the rules of audience behavior have permanently changed. Number 3, Crime 101, 2026. There is a moment when repeated mistakes stop being coincidence and start becoming a pattern. Crime 101 represents that moment. The film had everything studios traditionally rely on: a high-profile cast including Chris Hemsworth and Mark Ruffalo, strong critical reception, a director with credibility. On paper, this was a safe investment. In practice, it became one of the most revealing failures of the year. The genre itself is important here. Adult-oriented crime drama, a category that once defined Hollywood. But the economic model for these films has shifted dramatically. Audiences still appreciate them. They simply do not show up in theaters at scale. Despite that shift, the studio committed a production budget of approximately $90 million. That number alone created pressure the film could not sustain. To break even, it needed at least $200 to $225 million globally. It never approached that level. The worldwide gross stalled at around $57 million. That leaves an estimated loss of roughly $140 to $160 million. What makes this collapse more significant is that it was not unpredictable. The same studio had already experienced a similar failure months earlier with another adult drama at a comparable budget level. The data was available. The warning signs were clear, and yet the same decision was made again. This is not a failure of execution. It is a failure of adaptation. The industry continues to apply outdated financial models to a marketplace that no longer supports them. The audiences have not abandoned these stories. They have simply changed how they consume them. Streaming, on-demand viewing, lower-cost accessibility. The theatrical model for this genre has narrowed, not disappeared. Ignoring that shift does not preserve the model. It accelerates its collapse. And this film stands as one of the clearest examples of what happens when studios refuse to adjust. Number 2, Greenland, Migration, 2026. This one did not just flop. It ended a franchise. There are flops. And then there are decisions so misguided that they erase the future of an entire property. Greenland 2. Migration belongs to the second category. To understand this collapse, you have to go back to the original Greenland. It was never a traditional theatrical hit. It survived because of circumstance, a pandemic release, a limited theatrical exposure, strong performance on digital platforms. People discovered it at home, quietly, unexpectedly. That was its strength. But the studio misread that success completely. Instead of recognizing that the film worked as a low-cost streaming discovery, they treated it like the foundation of a major theatrical franchise. They increased the scale, expanded the budget to around $90 million, and pushed it into a wide theatrical release as if the audience had been waiting for a sequel. They had not. The opening weekend told the story immediately, around $8.4 million. A steep drop followed in the second weekend. Momentum collapsed almost instantly. The global total stalled at approximately $43 million. Now look at the math. With a production budget of $90 million, and the film needed at least $200 to $225 million to break even once marketing and distribution costs are included. It did not reach even a quarter of that threshold. The estimated loss sits between $170 and $180 million. That kind of financial gap does not just hurt a studio, it shuts down future plans. Any discussion of a third installment disappears. Any expansion of the story ends immediately. The franchise does not pause, it stops. And the reason is simple. The original audience never asked for this. They found the first film by accident. The sequel demanded attention it had never earned. This is what happens when studios confuse visibility with demand. One creates curiosity, the other sustains a franchise. Without the second, the first means nothing. And just like that, the Greenland franchise ended not with a conclusion, but with a miscalculation. Number 1. Melania and the Amazon MGM collapse. 2026. Sometimes a single film fails. Sometimes an entire strategy collapses. Melania is not just a box office disappointment. It is the final piece of a much larger breakdown. To understand this, you have to look beyond one title. You have to look at a pattern. Within a span of months, the same studio released multiple high-budget films targeting similar audiences. Mercy underperformed. Crime 101 collapsed. Another prestige drama failed shortly before them. Each time the budgets remained high. Each time the audience response weakened. Then came Melania, a documentary positioned as a major release. Significant acquisition cost, heavy marketing investment, expectations that visibility alone would drive interest. But documentaries do not behave like blockbusters. They require urgency, cultural momentum, a reason for audiences to leave their homes. This film did not have that. The opening weekend numbers were underwhelming. Worse, it was outperformed by a smaller independent project created by a digital content creator. That comparison is more than embarrassing. It is symbolic. It shows where audience attention has shifted. While exact financials remain less transparent than traditional releases, the broader picture is clear. Combined losses from this sequence of films exceeded $240 million in less than 6 months. That is not a single mistake. That is a systemic failure. The industry has changed. Audience behavior has evolved. But the strategy behind these films remained rooted in an older model. High budgets, star-driven marketing, assumptions about theatrical demand that no longer hold. And when those assumptions collide with reality, the result is not just one failure. It is a chain reaction. This is what makes this entry number 1. Not because it lost the most on paper, but because it represents something larger. A studio operating as if the rules never changed, and the box office responding by proving that they have. 12 disasters, hundreds of millions gone, and the same mistakes keep repeating. Big budgets, weak strategy, misreading the audience. Which one shocked you the most? And which upcoming release feels like the next collapse waiting to happen? Let me know below and stay ready because this year is far from over.